Trust everyone enjoyed lunch. We have a panel discussion today with regard to a conference that occurred in Washington, D.C. last month, referred to as Data Center World. All of those individuals before you today attended that conference, and each of them is going to give you a small presentation with regard to maybe their areas of expertise and things that they gathered and learned at the Data Center World Conference. After we finish, after we go through the entire panel, we'll do whatever answers to questions that you may have. Initially, we're going to ask Robert Akers to give us a little presentation on the energy needs and preferences. Robert, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I focused my sessions that I attended on power generation, which is no surprise to you all, I guess. My overall impression is there seems to be a lot of frustration within the industry right now because it's quicker to build a data center than it is to build a large power station. And the new AI data centers, they need a lot of power. The presenters seem to indicate that they would prefer to be on the traditional grid, but again, the traditional power companies aren't able to meet timelines that they would like to see. So they're starting to explore behind-the-meter generation, such as our microgrid statute that we passed here. They've looked at natural gas, and they've figured out, I guess, that they're subject to the same supply constraints that all of the rest of the power companies are subject to. They can't get a turbine any quicker than anybody else can. Their intermittent sources aren't adequate. The wind and the solar that they could put in aren't adequate. They don't supply power, baseload power, and the amount of power that they need exceeds what they're really able to generate. And the industry still seems to be focused on nuclear, but there was 3 different sessions where they discussed nuclear, and they seem to also understand that nuclear energy with the SMRs are a very long way away, and they can't build their data centers today and power them 10, 15 years from now. But it's still at the forefront of their minds, and it still seems to be a dream that they're chasing. They mentioned it a lot. One presenter did indicate that America could squeeze as much as 5, maybe as much as 10 additional gigawatts out of our existing American nuclear fleet if they did some upgrades. And he discussed 2 or 3 tax credits that are available to the power companies. He didn't provide a lot of detail on how they were going to get the extra power out of the existing fleet, but he did say it was possible. So one of the presenters talked about stringing together an awful lot of small reciprocating natural gas and diesel generators. Now they make generators, small generators, 2.5 meg, 3 meg, and if you strung 500 of them or 1,000 of them together, you could conceivably get the amount of power that they actually need. And if you've read the Charleston Gazette recently, there was an article where Point Pleasant Data Center are going to build 1,000 natural gas and diesel engine gensets and string them all together in order to get the amount of power that they need. That article was posted on May the 2nd, 2026. It seems kind of crazy that you would put that many together. I don't know what the environmental impacts will be and what DEP will say about that, but they're apparently exploring that option, that they just string together reciprocating natural gas engines because you can build them very quickly. There's not a turbine involved, so that's a possibility, and the guy was serious, and I was surprised when he said it, but it's right here in our own newspaper, so it seems to be going forward. It leads to energy efficiency problems. The heat rates are lower, the amount of power they produce per the amount of natural gas is lower, but it is fast, and fast is what they're looking for. And all of them seem to indicate that they would prefer to be on the grid, and maybe if the traditional power companies and the grid can catch up with their energy needs, they could use their behind-the-meter generation as a backup source or possibly as a peak loading. One of them suggested they could use it as peak loading and they could sell it when they needed it and turn it off when they didn't. So that's what I learned about the energy generation side of the meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you, Robert. If you have an agenda, and I don't know if you do or not, but our next presentation is scheduled to come from Delegate Linville. And Delegate Linville is supposed to be here to talk about technology, which is his day job, if you will, and it felt like it would be a nice fit. Unfortunately, Delegate Linville is unable to be with us today, which means that that particular topic falls to me. And those of you that know me know that my level of expertise could fit on the back of a flea. As such, I'm not going to talk about technology. We had a presentation here that mentioned Data Center World before I ever knew that we were sending anyone to Data Center World. And I sent the speaker a request to attend Data Center World. I sent it specifically because if you all have any recollection, I was a no vote on House Bill 2014. I wasn't a no vote because I necessarily opposed data centers. I opposed some tenets of the bill, and frankly, I'm not ashamed of that vote. But I did feel like it would be legitimate and reasonable for me to have some education, some level of understanding about this particular industry. And so I was the first one to request, even before I knew we were sending a group to Data Center World, and I'm glad that I went. What I am going to tell you about today is when I came back, I sent the speaker a letter explaining what I thought were my general observations of Data Center World as a novice in this particular industry. So I'm going to give these to you and we can go from there. There were 13 of these. Item number 1 was that most attendees and presenters agree on one fact, and that is that there is an explosive expansion in data centers, and this explosion is going to continue for the foreseeable future. That was without exception. Item number 2, important elements of location of data centers, regardless of size, are available power, adequate property, a regulatory environment that is manageable, adequate water resources, labor that can be trained for the specifics of the operation, and contract labor for electrical and HVAC. Item number 3, most people that I spoke with, and we did a lot of this as we did, the attendees at this conference were really, really smart people, but they weren't real social people. However, if you all have been around me a little bit, I do have a tendency to be social. So when we had breakfast or lunch or somebody was hanging around with me outside the door, we talked. Most of them are aware of the efforts that we are making to attract data centers to the state of West Virginia. And they're impressed by the fact that the state of West Virginia has, in fact, made those efforts. Item number 4, most presentations continually mention, and I quote, sustainable power, referencing wind and solar, and they do show a great disdain for power that is produced from coal and natural gas. Item number 5, cooling systems are changing, whereas the initial onset of data centers, the cooling, which is an important part of this operation, was air. But the majority of those will convert and eventually all be cooled by water. Number 6, data center developments come in various sizes. There are enterprise developments that are typically relatively small and specific to an industry. Large enterprise developments are fewer in number, but involve very large scale companies that most of you recognize, Meta, Amazon, Google, and other specific businesses. And then there are these hyperscalers, which want their applications to be very adaptable, changeable, and they use the term scalable in almost every presentation that I've been to for a variety of industries and applications. In other words, they're selling their services. They want those things to be able to adapt to whomever might be able to use them. Number 7, while there were a few mentioning an interest in generating their own power, and most are interested in access to power from the grid. And I think that sort of reflects what Robert learned, I think. Number 8, developers and suppliers are from around the globe, with a singular majority from California. Number 9, I found it curious, and you all might find this curious too. I think that the equipment and services represented at the trade show are interchangeable, with exception to heavy equipment, with what you find in a coal industry show. Couplers, large-scale power sources, water displacement, kind of water circulation items, geographical modeling, all of those kind of things. When I go to the Greater Bluefield Chamber of Commerce coal show that happens every 2 years, I find much of the same equipment. Number 10, I find it difficult to understand how the need for massive amounts of reliable power tends to follow the less reliable sources for power, or how there is little recognition that coal or gas currently provide much of the power for the cluster of data center operations in Northern Virginia. In other words, there's not a desire to produce power that way, but that's what's powering the current industry. And I don't know how they have a tendency to go in a different direction. Number 11, the demand for data centers has made it easy for those with capital to continue to monetize that capital with this product. It takes a lot of money to do these things. However, they make a lot of money. So if you've got capital, you can certainly expand your circumstance. Number 12, those engaged in discussion regarding abandoned surface mine property being viable and a possible good location for data centers found it very plausible. One of the things I did when I went there is I got a list of abandoned mine properties that had been reclaimed and so forth and so on. And when you define some of the details of that kind of property, these people sort of found it to fit within that ilk of the kind of property that would be suitable for data centers. Last but not least, number 13, there is absolutely no reason, based upon my conversations and the things that I learned at Data Center World, that we can't compete for this business in the state of West Virginia. That said, that concludes my presentation, or Delegate Linville's presentation for today. And we'll move on to Delegate Levitt, who is going to talk about some of the myths that he may have heard discussed about data centers.
There we go. So I broke this down into 7 myths. This conference really was fascinating. You had a combination of folks from everything as granular as engineers and operators, up to entrepreneurs and others looking to invest, to policymakers and others like us. And so there was a really wide variety of presentations geared at all these different facets. I went to a couple of different ones that touched on some of the different myths and the importance of interacting with the community. I will say it really struck me how important it is to be able to educate the community overall. And I think a lot of the data center developers are realizing that. Several noted in their presentations that there was a time 20 or maybe even as recent as 10 years ago when a data center, if it was storing data like, things like the nuclear codes, right? Seriously, things that are really important to our national security and other, they didn't really advertise where data centers were. They were smaller and they didn't want to draw attention to them. Now they're in a stage where they are realizing that they're behind the 8 ball in terms of explaining how data centers operate and what all they entail. So certainly a big takeaway was it's really incumbent on those who want to develop big projects that they come and educate the community. And my overwhelming impression was they want to do that. It is not in their interests to come in and fleece a community and leave states, pay attention to what happens around the country. And so, all of these large data center developers are saying, hey, it's really important that we come in, that we introduce ourselves to the community, that we let them know we want to be a long-term partner, and that we look for ways overall to not just educate them about this project, but to let them know that we are invested. This is important to us, because this really is a huge need there. So the first myth that came up frequently was just the idea that AI is a fad, and whether it's AI or not, but any one of you And even when you hear people protesting these, right, the use still of technology is ubiquitous. And so often, almost all of the technologies and other things that we are using are increasingly turning to AI, and so this is something that's only going to become more and more in demand. And companies are willing to do whatever they need to do in terms of, developing more efficient methods. In terms of, again, working with communities, they very much want to get this generation capability and be able to have these data centers, because it is massively there's just a massive amount of potential for them. So in my mind, and there's no question that this is not something that's going to go away. There's only going to continue to be more and more of a demand. And of course, we've seen here in the state, the governor has a 50 gigawatt by 2050 goal. That increasing power generation is important to our country, or it's important to our state, and it will continue to be important to our country. Another of the myths that was addressed was just the creation of jobs, and this is something that's been discussed here in this body. There's no question that there are a lot more jobs during a construction phase. So obviously it depends on the size of a data center, but during the construction phase, you're probably going to have 10 times as many jobs. So one could range from, nevertheless, you could have as many as 1,000 construction jobs, or even for a very, very large project, like some that are being contemplated here in the state, multiple thousands of construction jobs for the period of construction. Even after that time, there are still significant jobs that are available in terms of running the data centers. And we don't know how the continued evolution of technology might change that, but the numbers that generally are out there in a number of ways point to, again, between 100 and 200 jobs for a smaller, I'm trying to get the right piece here, for a large hyperscale campus might have between 100 and 300. Some of them that are being discussed, of the 4 that have been kind of kicked about in the state, would use even more than that. It seems pretty clear. So the potential for jobs after the development stage is very significant in terms of, again, hundreds of jobs. And these are high-paying, quality jobs, right? They require technical expertise. These would be very good jobs for West Virginians. One that we hear a lot about, next myth, is data centers use outrageous amounts of water. People have a lot of different views on this. I think the most important thing to start with is every project is different, right? So the key will be in what parameters are proposed to the state. The state is who receives those applications. Even if the state approves moving forward with one, someone still has to go through the DEP process and receive all the approvals. But in terms of water, most of I think a 500 megawatt data center would still only use approximately the same amount of water as an 18-hole golf course. I heard comparisons to laundromats and other things throughout the conference. So the amount of water that is used depends on the size, obviously, and it also depends on their cooling system. So those that are just using recycled water aren't taking in large amounts of water, and that really is not a concern there. Overall, my impression from different developers was that the future really seemed to be in just recycling water. Again, some of the myths that I heard sounded like they were kind of associated with data centers 1.0, and we're maybe up to kind of data centers 3.0. There were these early ones that were much smaller. As they grew, they were experimenting a lot with lots of different things, but the idea of hyperscaling that Marty alluded to in part has to do with just trying to do things in such a way that they can duplicate it again and again and again. They want to be able to fit servers in. They want them to be as environmentally friendly as possible, to have as little of an impact as possible. So that's the real goal that they have. I mentioned earlier about benefiting local communities. Again, we certainly have discussed ad nauseum here the potential tax revenue, but again, ideally large campuses, in addition to the jobs, are partnering with their communities, and around them would come infrastructure upgrades, utility investments, road improvements, broadband and fiber expansion. Again, some of the kind of 1.0 challenges of pollution or noise really have been dramatically mitigated, so that there's, again, every one of these is fact specific in terms of the project and how they design it and what their parameters are, but by and large, the new data centers being built are not significant contributors to noise or pollution problems. The electric grid, destroying the electric grid is I fit this under myths. It's one of the things that came up frequently. These are really complicated questions, right? And we've discussed quite a bit in this room, in this body, about our upcoming energy demands as a state, our ability to produce energy. I think, to reiterate something that, again, Delegate Gearhart said, there's no question that we are very, very well positioned to benefit here. And I think that's in part because very few states are in as much of a position to have both the generation as well as the transmission capacity that we do. But for so much of our history, we've generated energy and we've exported it. We've not used it here. And it was very clear, from this would be such a huge opportunity for us as a state to use that energy here to get more value out of it right out of the gate. And how we move forward with the electric grid, there are questions about that. There's a decision tree, right? There are various options, but there are many ways to move forward that where the PSC in conjunction with PJM, right, where we could have increased generation, we can transmit and that we need to not have it destroy the grid, if anything, to really strengthen that and not raise utility rates, which everybody agrees would be a bad outcome. Final myth I'll touch on is just the idea of, again, of this being a one and done process in terms of our state, in terms of House Bill 2014. This obviously wasn't something from the conference, but I just have heard this repeatedly in the state that local communities with no control are going to end up with these situations with no safeguard other than one sign off from the very top of the state. And again, it's important to remember that all of the DEP processes, all of the state permits one would need to receive are still required even after initial approval for something like a microgrid or to be in that position. So again, I think a lot of the details of these projects will help to inform the community more. Various communities, I hope that those that are looking to develop those will do more outreach about what they're doing. But again, by and large, it was very helpful to me to learn in a lot more technical detail than I'm able to repeat. But that so many of the kind of myths that I had heard before, and I'd also heard somewhat rebuttals, but I got in a lot of granular detail that just that those are not things that are realistic challenges for data centers these days. Thanks.
Thank you, Delegate. Next comments are from Delegate Maynor with regard to sites development and economic opportunity.
Thank you, Marty. Good afternoon, everyone, and it's educational. I actually went to data center world, obviously, to learn, to listen, to figure out what new technologies were on the horizon. I also went to Market, West Virginia, and what we've done with House Bill 2014. And I can just reiterate some of the things that the panelists talked about. People are still surprised about what West Virginia has to offer and what we've done with House Bill 2014. And so, everyone that we ran into, we talked about what we've done, we've talked about what we had to offer, and people were pleasantly surprised. And so I think even from this conference, we're gonna have more folks, more developers, more off-takers looking at West Virginia and what we're doing, and so I'm excited about that. After people heard about House Bill 2014, I can tell you that anytime we're talking about sites, businesses need certain things to attract companies, recruit businesses. I see Todd Hooker back in the back. We talk all the time about what sites need. Infrastructure, basic infrastructure, whether it's water, sewer, power, redundant broadband, et cetera. Everything that we traditionally talk about pales in comparison to what sites need for data centers, and that is access to major power, but also the speed to power. And so one of the things that we learned in this conference was there is an inverse relationship between cost of power and speed to operation and speed to business. And so the faster and closer you are to a gas pipeline or to an electric line, et cetera, the more valuable and the more attractive your site is. And so through that, I think, again, we had a lot of information thrown at us. I can tell you, again, traditionally speaking with business sites, the water has traditionally been something that was brought up. But as the delegate talked about, water is becoming less of an issue for sites now simply because of the innovations that are happening. And I do believe that data centers, off-takers, developers are learning and innovating and increasing technology advancements to address some of the issues that have historically been present with data centers. Again, whether it's the water issues and the amount of water availability, whether it's the power usage, whatever the situation may be, I can tell you the folks that we talk to are very mindful of some of the issues. They're very mindful of some of the pushback and some of the negatives that have been perpetuated out there, and they have innovated significantly to try and address those issues. And I can tell you, these folks, they don't want these issues any more than what the public wants these issues or we want these issues. And so, again, whether it's the cooling from the closed loop or the air cooling to the other various technologies, I can tell you that there's significant advancements being made. And so again, as far as sites are concerned, anytime we're talking about recruiting a data center, they're going to be looking for all the basics of sites and infrastructure. But I can tell you all of that, again, pales in comparison to how much power you can get to a site. There's a certain minimum, and then how quickly you can get that power to the site. And so those two answers, if you have answers to those two questions, your site becomes much more attractive, and people are willing to look at you. So with that, I'll turn it back over, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Delegate. Next, and I'm going to apologize for him in advance. We really did not have much that took place at Data Center World that talked about taxation. But knowing the capabilities of Delegate Height, I knew that he would be able to give us a little bit of information on that. Understanding as well that the Department of Economic Development is going to be with us tomorrow in a separate meeting, and they're probably going to discuss some of this also, so you may even be able to drill down a little deeper on that information. With that said, Delegate Height.
Thank you, Delegate Gerhardt, and good day to everybody. I want to start by expressing my strong support for House Bill 2014 and our shared efforts, I believe, to attract data centers to the state of West Virginia. And I think this legislation represents a significant opportunity to bring high-value investment, jobs, and economic growth to our state. But I also think, having said that we are now the proverbial dog that caught the car. And we suddenly find ourselves with as many questions as answers. And as a lucky citizen, I believe, of a county that has attracted a data center, I have been inundated with questions from citizens I represent and even my county government. As Delegate Gerhardt said, my role today is to talk about taxation and revenue as they relate to data centers. And while I believe HB 2014 provides a solid framework, particularly regarding real property taxes, the full picture is far more complex. And important questions still remain about implementation and downstream effects that are not fully addressed within House Bill 2014. So one of those questions is, who will collect these new tax revenues? How will they be redistributed? And the answer to that is the state. The state will collect these taxes, unlike other real estate or real property taxes, where the county is the one that collects those. This will fall to the state itself. Another question was, how will this significant influx of income to a county impact the state school aid formula? That one I've gotten different answers to, depending on who you talk to. So this still remains an issue that should be, I believe, determined by legislation or rules within the House and Senate, and not be left up to agency interpretation. So as you can see, there's probably some things we still need to work on regarding data centers legislative-wise. Another one is, what effect will it have on county levy rates and any required rollbacks? If anybody knows about rollbacks regarded to counties, especially growth counties, it could affect that. Now, according to the commissioner, it doesn't affect it at all, but I believe we probably need to explore that further to make sure that growth counties aren't negatively impacted, and possibly even look at eliminating rollback requirements altogether. So these aren't minor details as it has to do with revenue. They're fundamental policy questions, and they're open to interpretation. And these answers, or answers to these questions, may influence us to make adjustments in other areas of state code that have been affected unintentionally. So I think given the scale of the investment we hope to attract, getting these answers right is essential to maximizing the long-term benefits for communities while avoiding the unintended consequences. As it relates to revenue, Delegate Limble, who was mentioned earlier, has a revenue tool on his website and can give you some rough numbers based on the amount of gigawatts a data center will use. So if you have one coming to your community, you will be able to figure out what kind of revenue that will generate. It does make some assumptions. There's a lot of variables that goes into data centers, and it does make some assumptions, but I think they are conservative assumptions, and that once you plug in the numbers to that tool, I think it will give you conservative revenue estimates as well. So they could be much higher than what comes out on the tool. I can tell you that some of those estimates for Berkeley County, who is getting a 600 megawatt data center, will generate $15.5 million for the county itself, $25.5 million for the state in personal income tax reduction, $5 million to all of the other counties of West Virginia, and $2.5 million each to economic enhancement and grid stabilization. That is just the one data center in Berkeley County that will generate just 600 megawatts of power. And that is annually, yes. That's not a one-time thing. That is annually. So I would admit, like Delegate Gerhardt said, my knowledge is limited on this subject. I would encourage anybody that wants more information on this, to go to the Energy Committee tomorrow, who is going to have a presentation about data centers as well from Chris Morris and Commissioner Irby, and you'll get a whole lot more information than I can give you here today. But I'll answer any questions I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Height. We're also pleased today to welcome Samantha Smith, Department of Commerce, and she is going to offer a few comments from the Department of Commerce, and she also wanted to be certain that we understood that Mr. Morris is going to be with us tomorrow, and he probably will be able to expand upon her comments today a good bit, but we look forward to what she's got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As he said, my name is Samantha Smith. I'm a member of the Division of Economic Development, the Business Attraction team, and I also manage the state's site readiness program. So I've served in this role about 6 years, and I've been with the Department of Commerce nearly 10. Right now, I'm working exclusively with Chris and the Data Economy Office to provide continuity for the data center work that our office was engaged in prior to the passage of House Bill 2014. So just continuity with the pipeline of projects that we had, and then any new prospects. So I've actually attended Data Center World for the last 2 years and was asked to share a little bit today. So I just want to offer some comments, and many of those will echo what the delegates said. But I just want to start out by saying it's a very content-rich event. So different conference tracks depending on your area of interest and your expertise. So sessions ranged from broad discussions to very technical topics that can quickly get over your head unless you're fully immersed in the industry. West Virginia did receive several mentions as an emerging location for data centers in some of the sessions that I attended. House Bill 2014 was also mentioned mostly in the context of microgrids. I think it is worth pointing out that House Bill 2014, although it was a newly passed bill, was mentioned last year at Data Center World. So that conference takes place in April. So April of last year, it was getting some note at that time. So I just have some broad comments about some of the things that I heard. Generative AI was discussed this year. It was a much bigger topic this year than it was last. And so while AI is dominating the conversation around data center growth, it's really just one factor. So the argument that if you just don't use AI, then we won't need more data centers doesn't really hold true, because whether you are intentional about it or not, we're all using AI tools every day. It's being integrated into, if you're doing a Google search, if you're going about your daily digital life, you're exposed to an AI tool. If you are ordering a taco in the Taco Bell drive-thru, you are probably exposed to AI. So the majority of data center demand continues to come from the large-scale shift from cloud computing to and software as a service. So companies are continuing to move away from on-premise infrastructure, and they're moving that to the cloud, which is to say they're moving it to a data center. So if you hear people say, well, my information lives in a cloud, it actually is living in a data center. And so they're really the physical infrastructure behind our daily lives. So they're processing houses for things that we're doing every day: banking, ride sharing, social media. If you're reading a Metro News article, the website you're reading that on is hosted in a data center. Online searches, smart appliances, the whole Internet of Things, though that information all lives and travels through a data center. So I just have three main topics that I'd like to touch on quickly, and they do go back to some of the comments that were made by the delegates earlier. The first one is power. So power continues to be the biggest growth constraint, and that's followed by supply chain constraints. Behind the meter and bridge power solutions are becoming more of the discussion overall and when we meet with companies, but grid power is still preferred. So companies don't necessarily view on-site generation as a permanent substitute for grid power. They want ideally to see on-site generation that includes a plan to get that power eventually connected to the grid, because that's where they prefer to take it from. I heard lots of discussions around sustainability. So there's a big industry focus on sustainability with power, water, and energy strategies. Many in the industry are prioritizing the reduction of water use, so whether it be closed-loop systems or using reclaimed water. Some of you that are familiar with development might hear that referred to as purple pipe. So water that's reclaimed and will be used again before it's ultimately cleaned and discharged. And then on the energy side, lots of conversations about nuclear emerging as a solution to energy-constrained areas, although there is a long runway for those solutions, but as well as battery energy storage systems tied to on-site generation. And then the last thing is talent. So we haven't really talked a whole lot about talent, I think, in this data center discussion, but across the industry, there's a talent shortage in the data center industry. So the shortage of skilled labor is really affecting operations and some companies' abilities to expand, but I think it represents a big opportunity for West Virginia to be able to lean in. We already have such a strong network of traditional four-year colleges and community and technical institutions that really do a very good job of partnering with industry and to help provide needs-based solutions. So, as I said, I think there's a real opportunity for West Virginia to lean in and work with our CTCs and our four-year institutions to adopt training programs that produce adaptable and cross-functional candidates for those upcoming jobs. One of the things that we hear a lot in economic development when we attract companies is, oh, out-of-state people are going to come in and take those jobs. Well, this represents an opportunity for West Virginia residents to train for jobs that are going to be in West Virginia. And as the delegate pointed out earlier, these are very well-paying technical jobs. You might have to train for them, but they are well-paying jobs. So overall, personally, I think that there is a great benefit in attending the conference. I personally was able to connect with companies that are evaluating sites in West Virginia right now. I was able to connect with companies that have already made location decisions for West Virginia. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Smith. And just to restate for you guys, we do have a meeting tomorrow where Chris Morris and Matt Irby will be here to talk about some of maybe the more technical side of some of the observations that you've heard from our folks that we had attending Data Center World. With that said, happy to take questions. If you want to address it to someone specific, please say so. And if not, then we'll watch them pass around the microphone and get somebody else to answer the question. Delegate Green.
Thank you. Was there any kind of, and this is to anybody who could maybe have this answer, was there any talk about transparency, specifically of the potential companies that would be interested potentially in coming to West Virginia? Was there any concern as far as transparency in the fact specifically of where they would get their water from, how much water they would use? Was that ever brought up as a deal breaker to any of the companies? Or, and I think the delegate from the 53rd talked about this, of being more transparent, being more open, and kind of clearing up the air a little bit for the community. Is that, I guess, was there ever kind of an issue that, they don't want to, give that information, or would they be willing to share that to be able to help the citizens be a little bit more comfortable with what's going on?
I'll just say, in the past on Delegate Maynard, I didn't hear any concerns about that from anybody. People are very, they again, it is imperative to them, these companies, right? This isn't just like a passion project or something, right? Especially some of these very large campuses, right? They see this as America's future, and so they want to do everything they can in a way that helps the community to appreciate what they're doing, that helps them to get the approvals that they need, and so I didn't hear any concerns about being very open and transparent about what they're doing.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate what he said. I mean, just by nature of a business model, you're seeing certain areas of the country, they're pushing back on these due to either misinformation or what have you, whatever the reason. And I think there's a recognition that, hey, we have to do more transparency. We have to do more communication with community. And so we did hear several times the reiteration of that, of we have to get into these communities, we have to educate them, we have to be as open as humanly possible so the communities are welcoming and accepting of us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Delegate Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this question, I'll address it to the gentleman from the 53rd, Delegate Levitt. As you were addressing some of the myths involved, and one was that, and it's kind of a follow-up to what we were just talking about in regards to transparency. You said that you referred to it as a myth that these companies that want to put these data centers in don't want to be better partners with the communities, that they do want better communications with the communities that they're proposing this for. Would removing any type of local control that was included in House Bill 2014, and that's the part that really concerns a lot of us, that removal of local control, wouldn't that remove the incentive for them to reach out to the community? Because as far as I know, there haven't been a whole lot of town halls held by these companies. I'm most familiar with the one proposed in Putnam County. As far as I know, Google hasn't been out in the community discussing this with people. So that is a concern for a lot of people. Maybe not at data center world, but the people that live next to it, it is a concern. So you would still call that a myth that they don't want to talk to them? Because if not, they need to get out and talk to them.
Well, a couple thoughts on that, and I hear your point, and Ms. Smith can probably address this better than I can, but as much as, again, a takeaway from mine was companies need to get out there and be messaging for these better. That said, it strikes me that they are somewhat caught a little bit because they, unless I'm mistaken, right, I don't think any of these projects has been approved by the state yet, right? So it's difficult to go and say these are the parameters when the parameters haven't yet been approved, right? There may be various modifications and other things that they have to go through in that process. So it's hard to come and say, here's the product that we have and it's a great one when they're not fully approved to, I won't say sell, right, but to come and implement that. So I do think that kind of results in maybe kind of a bifurcated set of things to educate on. One is just in general to educate on what data centers are generally and what they can do in a community and that they want to be a partner. But a lot of the specific questions of what is the water usage going to be and what's the model and whatever else, you know, again, we're still in the nascent stage with the state. And so for anybody coming, you know, to spend money on an education campaign and then not have the project approved would be, I think, you know, not a wise use of time and resources for a company. So I think that's part of the duality that we have is that no project is set in stone right now as far as I am aware. And I do think there's some grace to be had there to say, let's let them get to that stage and then go and educate the community on. Now they've gotten this approved at a certain level. And again, recognizing there are multiple levels of approval, right? There's the approval to be able to qualify for what came under House Bill 2014, and then there are different levels of approvals for specific permits and things like that. But that overall initial approval is the key one, and again, it seems to me it would be odd to dive in fully, although I'd like to see a little more involvement, if possible, from companies.
Thank you. Delegate Heckert?
Thank you, sir. I don't know who's going to answer this or wants to even attempt to answer it. We keep hearing about the use of water.
Right.
And I've got on board with 2014, and I'm all for doing this. But I haven't heard anything about doing anything to help the local PSDs and the infrastructure to supply the water, or are we just going to pull the water out of the river and filter it another way? But where's the infrastructure for that going to come from, and who's going to pay for it?
I mean, so in most cases, these companies are willing to pay for that infrastructure. We've not had any major data center project that we're working with right now that have come to the state and asked for us to fund that infrastructure. Actually, the only incentives that we have available right now for these projects are what is already statutorily in place.
Hey, I think it would help everybody around the state if that got put out more, that the data companies are going to pay for that infrastructure because of the stuff going on around West Virginia and other places and some of the misinformation. This is becoming a big question to some of us, especially in my area, Wood County, of how we're going to supply the water and so forth. So that might be something y'all look at it, trying to get the word out a little more. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Delegate Canterbury.
Thank you. This kind of goes to the question. I know a lot of people seem to think that these things are just somehow imminent, but I know that there are something like 3,500 data centers planned around the United States right now, but there's a term I've started to see a lot, schedule slippage. It's related to everything from infrastructure shortages like transformers, switchgear, cooling infrastructure, to interest rates going up, the skilled labor gap, and other factors that may ultimately interfere with their development. Was there any discussion at the conference about risk factors to the industry, risk factors against, such as geopolitical risks, for example, how the Middle East situation might interfere with certain supply chains, or the Chinese threat to Taiwan, where a lot of the GPUs are coming from? Was there any discussion at all about risk factors associated with the industry that might slow down development?
I think likely there may have been, not necessarily in any of the seminars that I participated in, but supply chain risk is a big issue.
just to follow up a tad, if you don't mind. I did hear a pretty good bit, particularly with regard to supply chain. And most of what I think are probably the most reputable operators have orders well beyond what they have places to put them right now in order to accommodate that. So that they're ahead of the supply chain. In other words, they've ordered out several years, and so they're already in the loop. When it comes to capital, frankly, there seemed to be more capital than there were people doing the work right now. This is as I mentioned before, I think you can, if you have the money, you can turn this into some real money very quickly if you're able to develop these kind of things. So the group here, there's about 4,000 people here, but this is a very forward-thinking group. They're a thinking bunch. They're all the time coming up with bigger and better ways to do things and to accomplish things. And so they're pretty well prepared for what may be all of the different problems that you're talking about, recognizing that their risk capital may be slowed down a little bit by whatever might happen in the geopolitical world. So.
One thing I just wanted to add there real quick, there was a lot of discussion about, again, the overall tone was we got to rush, again, not rush things through communities, but there is a need here. We need to do everything we can to get that. And if you are watching the news headlines, right, there's a company called Anthropic, which announced in the last month or so that their AI model has identified vulnerabilities in every single online platform that we use. So there's very much an awareness that at the national level, right, if we don't jump in and invest here, then our adversaries will. Then China has every incentive to use more AI, right? And so that was a common discussion. We're seeing it play out in real time right now.
Yeah, and just to add one more thing to address what you said, most of these companies and off-takers, they're planning in phases. And so it's not like they're coming in, they're building the entire site at one time, right? So they're taking on big swaths of land, but then they have a phase one to get them to 100 megawatts or 150 or what have you, to eventually build up to 500 to 1 gig, whatever it would be. And so I think the hedging is already built into the phasing mechanism, if you will, and the planning. So hope that answers some of your question.
Thank you. Delegate Krause.
Thank you. Mine is more of a comment since Putnam County was brought up, talking about transparency and everything. I met with Google, who is coming into Putnam County the day after they bought the land, right before they announced and everything. And they were extremely transparent with us and talked to us, told us everything that they could at that time, even allowing me to take a picture of the PowerPoint presentation that they were giving us. So I could show the property that had been bought and the outlines of that. And they have mentioned several times during that conversation that day that they wanted to do town halls and everything else once they had more information under their belt, had a plan layout and everything for the building, and how they were going to get the water in, what cooling and everything they were going to use. So I know through my conversations with them that they plan to be very transparent with the community as they get information, and they allowed us to be very transparent with releasing a lot of information also.
Thank you.
I'd like to address that real quick. I've also talked to the data center that's coming to Berkeley County, Penzance, and they have been very transparent with everything within the county. They have to go and ask the county whether or not they can meet the capacities for water, for power, well before they decide on a location. So they have been in contact, and they're also working with the county now, even though 2014 says they don't have to. They're working with the county to find other sources. I know that the one in Berkeley County is very near a sewage plant, and they are working on ways to use the gray water out of that rather than pull out of aquifers or out of the river, and they're very accommodating and looking at those possibilities. So these data centers, they want to work with communities, whether it's spelled out in 2014 or not, they do, and they are very approachable, and they're very aware of of some of the concerns environmentally and community-wise. So I think that there's a lot of misinformation going on out there, and it's not necessarily true.
Delegate Hilbrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think statewide we hear a lot of people talking about rising electric rates. Separate from the microgrid approach, was there any commitment that if they're going to be pulling power off the grid, that any additional infrastructure needs, et cetera, would not be borne by our taxpayers on this?
HB 2014 requires that it not have a negative impact, right, on the...
That's for microgrids.
Oh, sorry. Say again then. So you're saying outside of that, is there any? Well, I grabbed the microphone too soon. I don't know if anyone has an answer to that. I will say there's been some discussion, I can't remember if it was the White House that first suggested this, right, but discussion of like community ratepayer agreements or things like that, again, given the national security imperative, but for companies to put out their agreements to say, even outside of that context, we are willing to sign something like this and commit we will not do anything to raise rates.
So I'm not hearing a yes there. In my neck of the woods, and Delegate Height can probably confirm this, if you run around with a moral sign, you'll probably get shot.
I'll also say that in 2014 also spells out, even if there's no microgrid, that the infrastructure going to the data center has to be borne by the data center. Any new infrastructure that's coming, if they're using the grid, any new infrastructure to get to the data center has to pay for it. The ratepayers can't be charged for any of that. So if electricity rates are going up all over the place, and I don't think they necessarily have anything to do with data centers. You can look at Northern Virginia, and the data center, or the Northern Virginia is paying around the same rates that we are here without data centers. So I think a lot of that has to do with power and whether or not we have the necessary power for the grid. Here in West Virginia, we're exporting power. So there's plenty of power here, and we can generate even more if needed. I don't think that is necessarily a problem here.
I think that's true for almost any industrial project. So while the power companies may credit you for a certain amount of usage, if you're requiring a good bit of infrastructure, you're required to pay to get the service to your site, regardless of whether it's a mine repair shop or a data center. So again, they'll make a business decision based upon how much usage you have, but you have to pay for your own infrastructure for those kind of things, regardless of the project.
And I'll add one more thing to this. Recently, the Trump administration issued an executive order. And essentially, it basically says these data centers must bear the full cost of all required power infrastructure upgrades, preventing new grid demands from increasing household electricity bills. And so, from the federal side, there's, pressure on these folks and these companies to make sure that they're building out their own power, paying for their own power, and not passing these costs on to the regular everyday consumers.
Thank you. Delegate Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess a question for either Delegate Height or Delegate Levitt, or anyone really. You talked about the recycled water that's going to be used in Berkeley County, which seems like a good development in terms of preserving water resources. Do you think it would be harmful to the industry if further requirements for water use were written into the law? Because I understand from what you're saying that a lot of them are trying to do the right thing. Would there really be any harm in requiring it in state code?
I don't know that you can require it. It makes it rather easy in Berkeley County because of the location of this particular data center is going to be right next to the sewage plant. So moving the discharge water across to the data center is going to be quite easy. I don't know that you could require that of any data center because they're not necessarily going to be able to locate that close. So you might have to push it a long way to get it to a data center.
But there are other options that would use a lot less water from what I think you reported back from the Data Center World Conference. So I just wonder if there's like some options that could be written into state code to preserve our water resources, one of which would be recycling.
Sure, but I don't know that you'd want to put that in code and make them, that's the only resource that they would have. I do know that talking to Penzance and Berkeley County, one of their issues was they didn't have a tenant yet. They don't even know who's coming in. They're building a data center and looking for a tenant at the same time. And they have about 5 or 6 on the hook that could possibly come. Their comments to me were, we don't know what system we're going to use yet, because a lot of that is dictated by who we have as a client and what their requirements are. So they didn't know whether it was going to be an open loop system, a closed loop system, whether it was going to be a hybrid air and water. They just didn't know. They couldn't. That's one of the reasons they hadn't gone to the community yet, is they just didn't have the answers this yet. I don't know that they even wanted to make an announcement yet, but they did. So they're sort of in limbo at this point.
And a similar question about the local control and transparency that other delegates have asked you guys about. Like, what would be the harm in allowing local communities to enforce their ordinances and zoning? Why not allow local communities to do that?
That's probably a question for somebody other than me.
I mean, obviously we had these discussions at length in committee, right? So this was very, very exhaustively discussed. My understanding is that most of the communities in the state don't have zoning regulations, right? That it's a fairly limited universe of areas that we're talking about. And, you know, but again, I don't know if there's anything new on the table that came from this conference that adds to what the discussion was in committee, but I think the view was this holds immense potential for the state. Here's a process, you know, part of the attraction potentially for people coming here is the speed with which we can provide these things, right? Because again, it is very much a race, if you will, both internationally between various countries as well as here within our country, right? To try and benefit from this. So, you know, our goal was to try and make ourselves as attractive as possible. Unlike other states, this isn't just like one of many great industries that are looking to pour into the state. So we want to do everything that we could to be attractive in a way that was responsible, but to help bring these dollars in a way that will benefit everyday West Virginians.
And if I could just have one more follow-up question for the chair.
Am I the chair?
Or, well,
Shoot.
I'll call you the chair.
Go ahead.
I was intrigued by what you said about the potential for abandoned mine lands to
Yes.
site these types of developments. And it seems like that might be a competitive advantage that we have in some parts of West Virginia that we might be able to double down on and just try to attract developments like this to areas where it's appropriate and not necessarily immediately adjacent to residential communities, or some of the pushback that you receive from communities due to overriding local control. You may not find those same types of resistance in areas like that.
I'm certain I'm not the first person to have this idea. Okay, I'm certain there have been other people to have this idea, but it seemed to be logical to me based upon those reasons, based upon the fact that mine sites typically have available resources, power. Frankly, mine sites tend to have available resources, a lot of water. They're not in populated communities. I thought it was a great idea. There are some drawbacks. They're not usually in populated areas, and you have to get employees of technical skill. They may not want to live 50 miles away from the nearest population center. So, you know, HVA techs may not want to be close to those kind of locations that are sort of remote. But when I talk to people, and again, I'm a sales guy, so I was selling it because I had a little idea and I thought it was a good idea. When I would sell it to people that I discussed it with, they seemed to think that there was merit. That's unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe for the folks in the Economic Development Department, I don't work there, so I'm really just a mouthpiece and a cheerleader. They're doing the real work with people that may, in fact, want to engage in that business here. But I did do a little bit of cheerleading and selling, and most people were receptive. So, With that said, and we've got 3 more questions. We're way over time. So brevity, please, if you can. Delegate White.
I don't have a question. I just have a couple answers. So one of the things about getting people to come to talk or town halls or whatever, if you do reach out, I know Jefferson County, they have a data center coming with QTS as their company that's going to be doing the data center. They reached out to them, and it's a little bit of Berkeley County. Chris Morris came out to do a town hall, and the vice president of QTS came out there too to answer a lot of those questions. They do have a closed loop system. They will be bringing water in, just like if you had a built-in swimming pool, they'll tank it in and fill it up, and they use that closed loop system. So if you do want to have some town halls, they're open to come and do that. And the other thing is about the local control thing. I think that's one of the reasons that, so not every county has zoning. Not every county does the same thing. They all have different rules and regulations. So in order to keep this to where we don't have bad actors and everybody has to follow the same exact rules and regulations, that's why now the governor has done a department just for that. They all have to go through that same application system. And I think this does keep bad actors out, and it does keep us having more control over who comes in and making sure that they do follow all the rules and regulations. So I think that's just, and they do have to pay. Like QTS is working with First Energy. They started several years ago on they do a study. They see what they have to pay for, what they don't have to pay for, and if they need a substation, QTS, the data center, has to pay for that. We don't pay for that. So anyway, that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Fluharty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was reviewing this data center world. Sounds like a very exciting event that you all went to, but this was an industry event, right? So I was looking over the panels. There was an investor briefing titled "Not in My Backyard: Diffusing Tensions and Accelerating Approvals," and there was a panel on winning over the "not in my backyard" crowd, end quote. So I guess my question is, were there any actual community stakeholders present for this data center world venture?
I can't answer specifically because I certainly don't know the resumes of all the attendees, but this was an industry conference, and I would imagine most of the people there were industry people. Again, I'm reference to coal show in Bluefield. There certainly usually are not residents around coal mines that go to the coal show, so I certainly doubt that there were residents that are in the areas of data centers that attended this conference.
Was there any representation from West Virginia outside of legislators and those here today?
The Department of Commerce had folks that attended. We had 5 legislators and a member of council staff. There could have been others there, but I'm not aware of them.
Okay. Do you wish you'd gone?
And what's that?
So do you wish you'd gone?
No. So further on that, there were some representations here today about how these companies want to work with communities, which I'm not doubting that. But just so we're clear, because we've talked a lot about House Bill 2014, it's not required that they do so. Can you point to any local verification that's needed in the process? Only the state, I know the DEP was mentioned. Any validation here, any approvals are at the state level, not the local level. So I know we have some community people here who are concerned about this going in their backyard without their approval. If a community, if a county commission, for example, they don't have the ability to stop one of these data centers from coming into their county, do they?
I think back to you're accurate in the fact that these are state approvals. The fact that there were seminars with regard to not in my backyard, I think is indicative of the fact that folks
They're
here,
not popular?
I beg your pardon?
That they're not popular with the people?
That there's a recognition that they need to certainly provide information to those local, whether or not there are zoning ordinances in place to deal with it or not. These are businesses, and you're a lawyer. I don't know that you would want to set up a law firm in a community that just hated you. You probably would prefer to do it where they appreciate who you are and what you're able to offer. And I think the data center business recognizes the same thing.
I mean, I'm hated by a lot of you down here, and I'm still here. But to that point, again, to my
I assume
point,
that's facts, not in evidence, but go right ahead.
so my point here, though, is that if and when a community does not want a data center to be built, what is their recourse?
And I'm not the lawyer here, so I don't have an answer, but you certainly, that might be a better question tomorrow for Mr. Morris and Mr. Irby, if you're
I
in.
will say, I don't know that they have any recourse, but I don't know that they would have had any
Exactly.
recourse without HB 2014. You tell me a company now that wants to come to any community, as long as they check the boxes that they're required to check, get the permits that they're required to get, they can locate their business as long as there is a person that's willing to sell them a piece of land to do that. So 2014 wouldn't have mattered.
To my point, yeah, I don't disagree with that premise, but the point is, we didn't allow for any recourse at the local level. We kept it all at the state level. We decided in Charleston we're going to decide what happens in every county and community throughout the state based upon us and not based upon the local community. That's my point, and thank you for making it.
Delegate Lewis. And I'll apologize, but they are really chewing me to get finished, so.
No problem. My question will be quick. We talked about a lot about water pollution. I haven't heard anything about noise pollution. I know that's been a problem that's been around the country. So what have we learned from Data World about noise pollution?
Same issue as I indicated before. Again, they have no desire to come in and present something that everybody in the community is going to be upset about and then go talk about to the rest of the country. So they have done, there are significant minimizations. There are ways to double, there's a technical term, but to double barrier, if you will, right? So there are multiple stages. So yeah, the current data centers being built, there's very, very negligible noise pollution at all.
Are they in close proximity to neighborhoods and communities?
They're in all kinds of places. So yes, there are some that are in those places. There are also the others that aren't. I mean, they can be put in lots of places, but they can be built right now in such a way that even if they were in the middle of a community, the noise pollution just isn't a thing anymore.
Delegate Lewis, I had a unique opportunity on Friday, just last, to be in the city of Manassas in Northern Virginia, where there are a variety of data centers, and I decided just to investigate that particular issue. And you can't get right up next to these places because they got security, like Fort Knox. There were some generators running, and they sounded like an engine on a car, if you will, that were running. But there was no noise, and I drove around these things as best I could, from the data center proper itself, zero. Now, the generators that I saw were located within specific facilities, so they did have the barrier of different buildings. All of the ones that I saw there were in the process of expansion. So you were looking at maybe 300,000 or 400,000 current square feet, and they were doubling what they were doing now. One of these had a very large apartment complex next door. Now, this is in an industrial area. Right, Manassas, Prince William County. I couldn't tell you what the boundary limits were, but there were 4 of them on separate corners of a very large intersection with no discernible noise problem. With that said, that's the conclusion of our meeting. I really apologize to the next committee coming in here and appreciate everyone's attention. We're adjourned.